Welcome to this session. As you can see, it's around AOS-CX 10.09 and the topic is Ingress policy support for sub interfaces. My name is Steve Bartlett. I'm a technical marketing engineer supporting CX switching, and this topic is specifically applicable to the 6300, the 6400 and the 8360 switch platforms. The content is split into two. The first part is Ingress policy support, a general overview and configuration guidelines. This is what is going to be covered in this session. And there is a separate PowerPoint session for Ingress policy support for PBR. So that's covered in part 2 of 2. Let's go straight in then on Ingress policy support for sub interfaces. Just a very quick recap on sub interfaces in general, which were introduced in 10.08. A sub interface, also called a child interface, is a virtual interface created by dividing the parent interface, and this could be a physical interface or a lag, into multiple logical interfaces. So this feature relates to IP transport, and subsequently the feature support is for layer 3 interfaces only. In the example here, you can see we've got multiple sub interfaces can now be created from one parent interface. This could be a routed only port at layer 3, a split level 3 port, or a layer 3 lag. And prior to 10.9, no support for applying policies on sub interfaces, although obviously the feature support was available for standard interfaces. So we have policy support available on sub interfaces. The syntax and features adhere to the existing policy guidelines and of course the functional requirements of sub interfaces themselves, which have to be a layer 3 interface. Layer 2 sub interfaces are not supported. So the approach is identical to the existing feature set applied to standard interfaces and lags. There's this concept of a classifier to identify traffic of interest. Traffic classes for Mac IPv4 v6 are available. And then we have this policy where we leverage one or more classifications and tie it to an action or a series of actions to create a policy. And then we apply our policy to our desired interface or interfaces. A quick refresh on the classification and policy process and look at some of the possibilities in this example. Here we have a number of classifiers aligned to a policy. Let's have a look at those. First one is we can match any traffic destined to subnet 10.1.0.0 and apply a policy to remark that traffic to the AF41 class. And we can also apply another action to this subnet and apply a CIR, a committed information rate of 10,000 kilobits or 10 meg. And then we could also have a drop policy on a specific host 10.1.1.1. There are other options, of course. Let's have a look at those. We could mirror traffic on a policy inbound if we so desired. And there's some other actions along with PBR, PCP and local priority options. And then we apply the appropriate policy to our desired interface. So let's look at some of the configuration examples in more detail. So on the left here, we've got a number of classifiers. We are identifying subnets specifically, destination subnets, and we're calling this classifier remark traffic. And then we're tying it to our policy. And on the policy, we're applying a number of actions. You can see the first one at the very top. We're remarking the traffic destined to our specific subnets to the DSCP class of AF41. Then we have a CIR action is applied to 1000 megabits per second. That's a minimum committed information rate that we have on that traffic class. And then we have a burst size of 500 megabits per second is applied. And then we have another policy action. If the burst is exceeded, that's a CBS rate of 500 megabits, the traffic is dropped outside of that burst window. And we've got some other policies here. Let's just build this slide out here. And the first one is we've got traffic 2 class is destined to subnet 192.168.1.0, and this is being remarked to CS2 in our policy. And also for ICMP traffic, we're denying any ICMP traffic to 172.16.31.1. This traffic is dropped. And there's some other policies there at the bottom that we're not using. In this example, the mirror policy inbound and the other actions, we're not using this in this policy. So to summarize the configuration sequence, the classifiers are configured to identify our interesting traffic. Then with that class match of the interesting traffic, it's applied to the policy that defines the actions and the policing criteria should we wish to apply. And finally, the policy is applied to the desired interface. Inbound policies are only supported. So some configuration verification commands, and you can see the one here, show policy and the policy name, and it will then pull up all that policy detail that is configured. Some more configuration verification commands. The first one is show running configuration of the specific interface, and it will identify the policy, of course, that's been applied to that interface. And the second one is show policy hit counts to look at the hit counts of that particular policy, show policy hit counts and the policy name. In this example, we've got the policy name of subint-policy1. So more verification commands. The first is to get all the switch policy configuration. We use the show policy configuration command for that. The next is the output applying to a specific interface, and you can see the command there, show policy interface and the specific interface. And output for the show policy command includes the policy itself, but not the class configured definitions. And you can see that with the show policy commands. And the last one is to look at the VSX peer. So we will type in the show policy VSX peer, and that will pull up the configuration and commands for the VSX peer. You can apply that with a combination of the ones we've already mentioned. Some policy configuration notes. A quick look at this. I'll of course call some of them out. Policy cannot be applied to a parent interface of one or more sub-interface, and conversely, a sub-interface cannot be applied to an interface if there is already a policy applied to it. Note that statistics will be aggregated when you use the count keyword for multiple sub-interfaces in the same direction, so do be aware of that. And you can review these other notes at your leisure. And some more configuration notes, and this is really about the policy-based routing. With the policy-based routing, if you are going to apply PBR, and that's covered in a separate presentation, you have to use the routed in command for the PBR. So that's the key point on this slide. Use the PBR with routed in when you are applying policy to the Ingress interface. And that is all for this presentation. Thank you for tuning in.